Stalin's demise in 1953 has been the subject of much speculation and debate. While official records cite a cerebral hemorrhage as the cause, lingering questions and emerging theories suggest there's more to the story than meets the eye. This narrative is further complicated by the secretive nature of the Soviet regime and the tumultuous power struggles that characterized Stalin's rule and its aftermath. Did natural causes truly claim the life of this formidable leader, or were darker machinations at play within the walls of the Kremlin? We'll examine new evidence and perspectives, shedding light on the geopolitical and internal Soviet implications of his passing. Stalin's health began to rapidly decline following the Second World War, almost immediately following the Allied victory. During the Soviet Victory Parade, Stalin suffered a stroke and suffered a heart attack later the same year. A heavy smoker, his health would gradually deteriorate over the next 13 years until his habits finally caught up with him on the 28th of February 1953. In the last 3 years of his life, Stalin's health rapidly deteriorated. Constantly told by his doctors to rest and live a healthier life, he took frequent long holidays in his dacha, a holiday home, but continued to drink and smoke heavily. In 1951, he spent almost half the year holidaying in Abkhazia. He became increasingly paranoid, seeing plots and conspiracies around every corner. Despite his constant need for them, he mistrusted his personal doctors the most. After one doctor, Vladimir Vinogradov, advised him to retire, he was declared part of a plot to oust Stalin and was imprisoned alongside many other doctors, most of whom were Jewish. The accused would all be found not guilty, but only as Stalin died before they could be tried. But this was not the first time Stalin's doctors had come to harm. Dmitry Pletnyov had worked with party officials for many years, even caring for Lenin. He examined Stalin in 1937 and diagnosed him with megalomania and a persecution complex, which led to his eventual arrest and execution in 1941. Stalin's suspicions were not only directed at medical professionals. One of Stalin's greatest fears was nationalism, which might cause one group to attempt secession from the Soviet Union. Dozens of different ethnic groups, such as the Chechens, Tatars, Latvians, Poles, and more, were deported in the last 10 years of his life, usually sent to the wildest regions of far eastern Russia, while their traditional homelands were repopulated with ethnic Russian settlers. Some physicians believe Stalin suffered from a degenerative brain condition caused by his heavy drinking and smoking, which causes arteries to harden, even those in the brain, something that had been recorded during his autopsy. Already notoriously ruthless and paranoid, a condition such as dementia, for which the risk is almost 50% more for heavy smokers, could have exasperated his extreme personality flaws and made him even more anxious and suspicious than usual. The death of Stalin. Joseph Stalin died on the 5th of March, 1953. At the time of his death, the Soviet Union had existed for 31 years, and he had ruled for all but one. He was the living embodiment of the Soviet Union, and his death left a great vacuum, which many of his former allies and enemies conspired to fill. Stalin and some of his closest associates enjoyed a night of entertainment and drinking. After retiring to bed, orders were given to not disturb Stalin until noise could be heard from his bedroom, to not wake him. The order was heeded until 11 p.m. on the 29th. His maid entered his room and found Stalin unconscious, but breathing heavily, laying on the bedroom floor. After 3 days, Lavrenti Beria and a team of doctors came to assess him. They found he had an abnormally high blood pressure and partial paralysis caused by a stroke. His blood pressure continued to increase as the days passed, and many attempts were made to reduce it, such as the application of leeches. But this had no effect. He continued to deteriorate at an alarming rate and was finally pronounced dead at 9:50 p.m. on the 5th of March. A medical team carried out an autopsy and found that he had a severe bleed on the brain. He also had internal bleeding in his stomach and heart. Doctors concluded that, from the onset of the brain hemorrhage, nothing could have been done to save him. Much like Lenin before him, Stalin's body was embalmed and put on public display for people to pay their respects. His funeral, an occasion of mourning for some, and of celebration by others, ended in tragedy, as mourners in the large crowd were trampled and crushed. Stalin's death temporarily destabilized the Soviet Communist Party, as various politicians and political cliques jostled for power. Stalin had left no designated successor, and so many of the men who had given the most rousing eulogies at his funeral were the same men who had already prepared a plan of attack, long before Stalin's death, to replace him as leader. The Central Committee met on the day of his death, and so began the race for a new leader. 3 men came to be seen as the main contenders: Lavrentiy Beria, Nikita Khrushchev, and Georgy Malenkov. Malenkov and Beria were made head and deputy head of government, while Khrushchev was given a lesser position, that of Secretariat of the Central Committee. Beria began his consolidation of power. He appointed his allies to important positions. Beria had been responsible for many purges and executions, and so those who opposed him were too afraid to act against him. Khrushchev acted quickly. He brought back Marshal Georgy Zhukov from political disgrace. He was famed for his leadership during World War II and deeply loved and respected by every Soviet soldier, but had fallen foul of Stalin earlier in that year and had been politically sidelined. Zhukov was appointed Deputy Minister of Defense, making Zhukov an ally of Khrushchev, and by proxy, the entire Red Army. Beria's own deputy, Malenkov, eventually turned against him, in fear of both Beria's unpredictability and Khrushchev's new ally. Within 3 months of Stalin's death, Beria was removed from power. He was arrested by Zhukov, under orders from Khrushchev, during a meeting of the Council of Ministers. Beria was charged with counter-revolutionary activity, working for British intelligence, and was declared a traitor and capitalist agent. Malenkov was still in power. Khrushchev used Malenkov's unpopular policies to unite his many enemies, eventually managing to limit his powers, and eventually demote him, with Khrushchev fully consolidating his power in 1956. Following Khrushchev's rise to power, the Soviet government began a policy of de-Stalinization. Khrushchev gave the famous secret speech declaring, "The negative characteristics of Stalin, which in Lenin's time were only incipient, transformed themselves during the last years into a grave abuse of power by Stalin, which caused untold harm to our party. Whoever opposed this concept or tried to prove his viewpoint and the correctness of his positions was doomed to removal from the leading collective and to subsequent moral and physical annihilation." All the symbols of Stalin's reign were removed from Soviet Russia. Places named in his honor had their names changed, such as Stalingrad becoming Volgograd. His name was removed from the national anthem. Buildings were renamed, and his embalmed corpse was removed from public view at the Lenin Mausoleum, where it had laid beside the body of Vladimir Lenin as his equal. The gulags were slowly emptied, and many people who had been denounced by Stalin, including those who were long dead, had their names and reputations rehabilitated. This began a partial, if only mild, liberalization of Soviet society. Relations with non-communist nations were encouraged, even if there was still a real sense of them being their adversaries. And the Soviet economy grew, with the quality of life for most people increasing. Foul play. There were hundreds of party officials who had something to gain from Stalin's death, and many people who had good reason to want him dead. While the official record does not mention it, many have suggested there was foul play. At the very least, Khrushchev, Malenkov, and Beria prevented Stalin from receiving timely medical care, as doctors did not arrive to assess him until 12 hours after the discovery of his unconscious body. Their refusal to have him seen could be explained by the trio wanting him dead. It could also be that they feared that, if he was to survive, they would be accused of plotting against him, which would ensure their imprisonment or execution. If Stalin was poisoned, the most likely suspect would have been Lavrentiy Beria. Despite his position of great power, Stalin was becoming suspicious of him later in life. Stalin had concocted the Mingrelian affair, which accused many of Beria's Georgian supporters of planning an uprising and succession from the USSR. The incident severely lessened Beria's influence, but he managed to remain in his position, allowing him to briefly claw back his power following Stalin's death. Beria had selected the doctors who assessed Stalin, and supposedly dictated to them what should be written in their reports. One of the doctors, Arseny Rusakov, apparently detected evidence of poisoning, but he died soon after, dying 5 weeks after Stalin. Beria then sent Stalin's bodyguards away to Moscow, with 2 of them, according to official documents, committing suicide. All official documents were removed from Stalin's dacha, again on the orders of Beria, along with all of his furniture, and most suspiciously, all of his crockery. In 2003, shortly after the records of Stalin's last days were released, one researcher deduced that he had been poisoned with the blood thinner warfarin. Warfarin is tasteless and colorless, making it an ideal drug to hide in food and drink. Though perfectly safe at sensible doses, at high doses, it causes internal bleeding, which might explain the many hemorrhages Stalin suffered. There will probably be no definitive answer to the question of how Stalin died. While millions of Soviet records have been released since the Soviet Union's dissolution in 1991, many still remain hidden from the world, accessible to only a small few. Even if all these records were released, relevant ones could have well been destroyed or altered immediately after Stalin's death, or during the years following his death, when his reign was denounced by the new Soviet government.